Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mark Medema from the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, the Charter School Facility Center. Welcome to today's webinar on how does the pandemic affect construction for charter schools. We'll be getting started here. First of all, usually the most popular question for these webinars is, will this be recorded? And the answer is yes. We'll record it. We'll probably we'll summarize some of the talking points as well, and put that in a document and send it out to all the registrants at the end of today for the webinar, and the talking points probably tomorrow. Everybody will be on mute, so the producer has control over that, except for our speakers today. If you do have questions, there is a call out box. I think everybody should have a menu that pops up on your screen. You feel free to ask questions in the chat room. Those questions will be monitored and then made public for the ones that apply to everybody. If it's an individual question, it'll be responded to just for you. And we'll be taking those questions throughout the webinar. We'll probably spend 30 minutes with our panelists and then 30 minutes with questions and answers at the end. And if you want to weigh in on one of the panelists' response, feel free to post your comments and we'll try to insert them as they happen as well. And then, again, we want to just wish everyone a safe experience right now, and to follow all guidance from the CDC and everyone else. And that's really the issue here as we enter construction is how do construction projects abide by that. So today we have 3 speakers who will be working with us today. First of all, Laura Feeman from Charter Schools Development Corporation. The second will be Drew D'Amico from Building Hope, and the third is David Leahy from Turner Impact Capital. All 3 of them are charter real estate developers focused specifically on charter schools. They've been in the business for quite a while and have numerous projects in both under their belt, as well as a lot of projects that are live today. So we'll ask them some questions about the projects that are going through today, anything that they're experiencing, hopefully some helpful tips. Again, a lot of this is still new, and so we don't really know if we have the answers as to what's going to happen come September 1st, but we'll try and provide some guidance for that. What we'll do is start out, I'll ask Laura some questions, and then Drew, and then David, and then we'll get to the Q&A. So to begin, Laura, all of your projects, I think, are being deemed essential right now and still ongoing. Can you speak to any risks that you think about this essential construction period that you're seeing today?
Sure. Good morning, Mark. Good morning, everyone on the call. Hope everyone is staying healthy and safe, and again abiding by all the protocols. The projects that I am currently managing and that we are seeing are primarily in states that have considered construction an essential governmental or an essential service. So for the most part, those projects had been under development for 6 to 10 months previous, and so quite a bit of the process we've already gone through, and we are under construction, and at this point aren't seeing any significant delays, and certainly have requested that all of our contractors keep us up to date as far as they and their subs also maintaining those distancing rules and other protocols. I think probably the one item that is starting to come up involves some entitlement issues. So those items that relate to public meetings, things like zoning changes, things like traffic impact statement reviews by a local zoning board, city council action if that's requested or required for special use permits or for other school-related operational final approvals. We're seeing that in most cases there are some accommodations being made. In Phoenix, as an example, the city has determined what items are critical to keep a critical path, and those are all being done remotely by Zoom call or otherwise. inviting the public to all of those, and inviting the public to be on those calls and be able to make their voices heard. We are also seeing some other places, as an example in San Antonio, all public meetings have been deferred until May 15th at this point. My projects aren't critical for that date, but if it goes much past that date, there could be some potential problems with that. Presumably, the cities will be reacting appropriately to allow some sort of distance call or a video call to be sure that there's public impact or public input on those particular items that require a public meeting. The last thing, Mark, I think you and I had discussed was anecdotally some things like traffic impact statements seem pretty straightforward. You get a traffic impact study done, you submit it, and the city approves it or doesn't approve it and tells you what type of traffic controls you might need. Right now, nobody's driving. There is no traffic. This would be a great time actually to get a traffic study done, but it will not be reflective of reality. So there are some municipalities that are allowing historical data as long as it is within 24 months to be used to create those traffic studies, and then the process will be that they will review those, presumably make their recommendations based on that historical data, and then the developer or the school will have to, once life goes back to normal, conduct a more current traffic study and then make adjustments. So we are seeing that construction is A, deemed essential in most places, and B, that the municipalities and the other governmental agencies that oversee construction are trying to make accommodations to be sure that projects will continue.
As we see projects that seem to be on track for now, are there ways that you think schools are starting to look at alternatives or contingencies for the schedule in case things begin to slip over the summer as we get closer to the schools opening?
Yeah, I have not experienced a situation where we are being told that construction will be delayed to a point where occupancy is not within a realistic time frame. Most of our projects, we always have a contingency plan set up, whether that's, space in a church or some, convention area where if we do have a 2 or 3 week delay, some learning can continue. I actually think that this experience with distance learning will actually be a great tool that potentially going forward, if there are delays, that there can be an implementation of academic delivery without a physical building. So right now our projects already had contingency plans, so we feel fairly fortunate that we had a little bit of hindsight there. But if it goes significant, for instance, if all construction gets shut down and we literally have a 6-month delay, that will certainly be a challenge and may involve implementing a distance learning model in schools that probably had not expected to do that as a long-term solution.
It's a good point that today's experience might be something we actually rely upon early next year if we find strides on. So that's on the scheduling. A question on pricing. Have you seen any impact yet? Either materials or labor, or I guess as everybody has land secured already by now?
So we are not seeing a significant impact on materials right now. One of our projects does have some materials that are stuck at the Canadian border. Thankfully, that those materials being delivered is okay as long as the Canadian border doesn't get stuck for 6 months. We keep using 6 months as being like a critical time, but that does kind of feel like a time that would make things very critically a problem. As it relates to labor, We're actually seeing some loosening of the labor market. There are a lot of people out of work right now, a lot of people very suddenly out of work, and a lot of people that maybe had construction skills went on to other positions and other jobs, and they've been laid off. Places like in Las Vegas, as you can imagine, with almost 80% of the population relying on the tourism industry, there is a significant number of folks that are looking for any side gig that they can get to supplement their income. And so there appear to be a loosening of pricing on the labor side of things in certain markets, of course. And then lastly, as it relates to real estate, I can tell you from our own experience, we have a property that's on the market right now. There's not a lot of activity, and we're not sure that the price that we set, let's say 45 days ago, will hold. And so there may be some opportunity for schools and developers and others to buy some real estate at a fairly good price at this point, but we have not been actively seeking to buy real estate right now, so can't really speak to that.
Thanks. And you have projects in, sounds like Nevada, Texas, Arizona,
Colorado.
Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Drew, on this question about the contractors moving forward, how are the contractors reacting to all of this? How are they managing their trades and the labor issues and people showing up to work?
Good question. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. The AGC, which is the Association of General Contractors, has been doing weekly surveys of during the coronavirus they've been surveying about 1,400 contractors a week. And on the effect of the pandemic, and I believe the results are relevant to charter schools and to the contractors that we're working with. One of the areas that they surveyed was the effect of state and local official, or agency orders to halt work. A week ago, 18% responded it was affecting them, and 2 weeks ago, and last week, that number increased to 39%. 45% of the contractors on March 23rd in the survey said they're having delays with and disruptions, and that's up last week to 59%. The shortage of materials week to week has gone up from 25 to 35%, and the shortage of subcontractors has risen about 18 to 28%. And so I think some of these numbers are indicative of the effects that the virus is having on contractors around the country, and how it may or may not affect projects in different markets.
Are contractors having to respond to OSHA, and are there new rules and regulations that they have to abide by that's affecting schedules or just their ability to conduct the work?
Well, I think that the contractors are required to follow OSHA requirements, and usually with respect to worker safety, that's driven by the guidance that's provided by the CDC or the World Health Organization, and different contractors are reacting in different ways, just depending on how they're structured and what's happening within the market that they're in.
Are any contractors starting to notify about stoppages due to force majeure, or how does 500 lawyers will give you 500 different answers on this question?
Yeah, well, look, Building Hope has 11 projects under construction for delivery in August. We've received force majeure notices from most of our contractors. Reality is COVID will cause delays. Starting point for anybody who receives a letter is to go to the contract documents, right? Does your contract have language to describe the party's rights for delays? Some contracts may not explicitly say force majeure. Sometimes there's exhibits with contractors' assumptions and clarifications. I think the big question that we've been asking and what we've been talking about with our attorneys is, does this fall into force majeure? Right? Any contract before March of 2020 probably doesn't use the word pandemic, but falls under an event, that's outside of the contractor control. And obviously anything that may affect the health, the life safety of workers on site, I don't think as an owner, we have an opportunity to push, that responsibility off on the contractor. I think if they have to stop work for health and life safety, if you get a notice, sometimes it's a notice. We're just getting these notices because contractors are just providing early warnings to us. And then in some notices, they're specific, they're exercising specific rights within the contract. And so at that case, when you get a notice of that nature, I'm not an attorney, but what's important here is that I think you follow a process. What is the remedy, right? And so when you try to think about what the remedy is, start to look at the AI contract if that's what you're under. There's different types of contracts, but in general, the remedies are an extension of time and an increase in the contract sum. Most AIA contracts don't allow for the contract sum to be increased, other than potentially an increase in general conditions. So there needs to be a judge of some sort, and the contract usually tells you that the architect is the judge of what the contract cost increase could be, or what the time delay could be. But the truth is, we don't know all of the outcomes right now, and these are unique circumstances. So again, if a notice letter is given, I think everyone needs to start that conversation with their contractor, or even before, right? Different charter schools may have different delivery methods, and sometimes a contractor may fail to give notice. But once you get the notice, and what should be done and what can be done, really just starts with everybody coming to the table right now and working on a plan. So be proactive and be creative. Work with your contractor and communicate. The contractor has a right actually to request from an owner, in most cases, their financials. However, the owner doesn't have a request to request the contractor's financials. If they give you a request, you need to answer it, right? So ask the contractor for a plan. Ask the contractor to get agreement around what items are going to cost more money, right? Directions on which way to proceed. Ensure that your project schedules are updated, right? Again, just communicate.
Are there ways, I know the contractors are really caught. They want to be able to provide wages for their employees and continue projects, because we don't need more unemployed people today, but we also have to create safe working conditions. Is there anything the school can do in working with the contractor to either help them navigate this situation, or is it just be more understanding of the dilemma that everybody's in?
In terms of, excuse me, just so I understand, in terms of the school working with the contractor to help?
Right, correct.
Yeah, again, I think it's on the owner or the school to really be proactive again and communicate with that contractor, and don't ignore their requests. I think those are the key points that I think are really important right now.
If we do see construction have to shut down,
yes,
what should the school think about in either creating the safe condition for the facility and or remobilizing the project when it starts,
yeah,
and having backup plans?
Yeah. So again, I think it's everybody's situation may be a little bit different depending on the type of contract that they have. Some people have lump sum contracts. Some people have cost plus contracts. Some people have design build contracts. those things need to be thought about. And then once you understand the type of contract that you have, what is the contract time, right? And what is the contract sum, as I mentioned earlier? So if the job gets shut down, the contract should tell you what the remedies are. The question becomes, how do you negotiate those up front now, rather than if it gets shut down for an extended period of time?
That's a good point, to be more proactive and start thinking about what could happen later this summer.
Correct.
Have you seen any schools with backup plans?
Yeah, well, we've working on backup plans and have backup plans for a few of our schools. Certain markets have different situations going on with contractors. Delivery dates are in different places, but I think backup planning is probably the key priority for a school at this point. If you don't have one, you should get one in motion and really focus on that, because that will save you a lot of trouble, because you really don't know what's going to happen in the next several months, depending on which market you're in.
Right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And David Leahy, so what can school leaders do today to be flexible with the construction schedules? Is there things they can do to either help design changes or different materials? If they have products or materials stuck at Canadian borders, are there ways to include something else or shift to different products?
Sure. Thanks, Mark. The answer is yes, and we're actually seeing that play out. I think particularly if you're a school looking to move in, sometime this summer, early fall, you're at a point where probably a lot of the big stuff has been ordered, and hopefully in many cases it's in place. I think it's probably around your finishes, whether it's things that may or may not seem minor, like your window shades, and we have an example where we've changed those out for something that has a shorter lead time. We changed out flooring in a school because we looked at what was currently stocked locally to avoid those very things. But I mean, I think the key is being flexible as a school leader, and I know they've all demonstrated that thus far, and just in terms of how they're delivering education, food, and social services to their families, and certainly within their personal lives as well, and it certainly carries over to how they need to be thinking about their school project. And a lot of people have already referenced in terms of the timelines. We're in a position right now where we don't know the exact start date of school at this point, and that therefore we don't know when this has to be done by. And kind of associated with this, as it's already been said, is that while in many places right now there is the ability to continue to do work, in many cases at a slowed pace because you have less materials or laborers on site, but you are able to continue, and will that continue? You've got examples that in New York at one point construction was essential and schools stopped. There's now potential consideration that schools can now be deemed essential again. I don't know if that's finalized yet or not. So, kind of depending on the day, you've got to be flexible and kind of understand your position.
And then besides the on-site work, or maybe with it, back to the working with the public officials and the notifications and the entitlement process, are there ways that schools can work with officials throughout the construction phase? Are there, earlier you had mentioned there's utilities are often sometimes just not in the contractor's control. Yeah, and I would say utilities are a big one, and as we all know, they are always a challenge, with or without a pandemic. So even more of a challenge, kind of in these current situations. You have an example in Washington, D.C., where D.C. Water has notified everyone that they are currently only doing emergency repair work, so they're not doing any shutdowns.
for connections that will eventually need to be made to your building. So I think as it relates to that, one of the things you as a school leader, particularly if you're the one that's having to manage the development of your building, is you need to be kind of asking each week at your owners meeting, and hopefully that's continuing virtually or in some fashion, kind of where are we with our water and sewer, our gas and electric, our telecom, and the like, so that you have a sense as you get closer to those times when connections need to be made, assuming you're in a situation where they can safely be made, that you're ahead of that, and can enlist this the local support that you need. Assuming we get to the point where it's clear when you should or can be in your building come the beginning of the school year.
As we get towards the beginning of the school year, presumably we're going to see people looking for a lot of temporary certificates of occupancy, waivers for a lot of inspections and so on. Are there ways schools can begin to plan for that or reach out to officials and start to inquire, or is it just too early?
I think it's probably too early. Certainly you've seen kind of a lot of other examples thus far of various locales suspending kind of typical rules, whether it be for restaurants and what they're able to deliver and how they're able to deliver, or the like. There certainly seems to be a mindset among a lot of these various agencies and governments that they understand the situation and they're trying to figure out how it works. I don't know that we're at a point yet where we see what that looks like kind of when you're finishing up a building. A lot of times, a locale will allow you to open with a temporary certificate of occupancy with, still some things that need to be done and inspected, but certainly kind of all your basic life safety needs in those buildings, need to be ready at that point. But I think it's still too soon to see if there are kind of other things that are typically in place that folks will allow to happen after the fact.
And have you seen some of the schools come up with any creative backup plans?
I don't know if they've come up with it. They're certainly thinking about it. And it really depends on the situation you're in as a school. If this is kind of your first building and you're not opening at capacity, your backup plan in terms of kind of other temporary space is a little easier than if you're moving in an entire school that's already at capacity and you're moving into your permanent home, and you've outgrown your temporary space. So finding 5 classrooms, while not easy, is certainly easier than finding 20 classrooms. So I think folks are thinking about that. I agree with what Laura alluded to at the very beginning in terms of distance learning might be an answer to that. But again, we don't know that for sure. But certainly as we think of kind of innovative ways to address this, that's got to be on the table.
Yeah. And now you used to work for a school. What should a school leader be doing these days, even if they're not the one directly responsible for this construction? Or how does the communication channels change in the best interest of everybody?
Yeah, no, I think it's always important as the leader in terms of communication. I think it's become that much more important at this point. And I think that's actually something that we've seen charters do very well over the past few weeks. We've seen the number of kind of organizations that have done such amazing outreach, both with direct phone calls and with providing things to both their staff and families, and that needs to continue. As it relates to the building, I think it's important to continue to give folks, again, both staff as well as your families, kind of that insight on where you are, and kind of the honesty that there's a lot of unknown here. But I think folks will want to hear the truth and what the reality is. But I think that provides in a couple of things. One, it provides the kind of important connection that folks need, as we've all seen through this. It also is an opportunity to provide folks with a bit of hope on coming out the other side of this, and something to look forward to, whether it's students and families in the new building, whether it's the staff of the new building, and looking forward to that. And I think the important part of all of that, it's kind of, you're in a period right now, kind of here in the spring, where you're enrolling students for next year. So it's important to kind of maintain those contacts and have those folks understand what realistic expectations are. And you're also recruiting staff. So enrolling students and recruiting staff. So that communication is that much more important. One kind of potential suggestion for folks as it relates to their building, we have no longer do we have the ability to do on-site owners meetings weekly. So we, in one project in particular, are using Teams like we're using here as the vehicle. But at the end of meetings, every other week, the superintendent who's on site, through the power of the camera of his phone and the application, is able to take us on a site walk and go through and kind of see where we are. And that kind of same approach we're going to use with a school that, in the past we've done hard hat tours for both potential families and staff to let them see kind of where we are and what's going on. We're changing that obviously from in person to on a screen, so it's something that can be incorporated in how folks communicate about their facility.
Great, thank you very much. We do have a handful of questions that are starting to roll in. Let me see if I'll might direct a couple of them here that popped up so far. For this year's deliveries, somebody asked, some states have talked about perhaps having an all summer program, or even having an early start for next year to try and make up for a lot of the lost learning time that's happening right now. Have you seen any of the schools think about how to stage their construction to at least have some space open, or what they might do if they're called upon to open up even earlier than expected? Do you think that's even possible? David, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, given what we just talked about over the past 30 minutes or so, I think kind of giving folks the expectation for going earlier is not particularly responsible, just given where we are, particularly for new facilities. Obviously, kind of if you're kind of are already in place, it's a whole different question. But relative to this conversation, I think it would be a challenge, and I think it would be a whole lot of overpromising.
Okay.
I agree.
That makes sense. So we spent a lot of time worried about, the crisis at the moment is for schools opening up this summer. There are a lot of projects that are going to be focused in the next couple of years. Laura, if you thought about, you mentioned something about trying to sell property. Is that, like, if a school's thinking about buying property, is it a wait and see, hold off as long as possible? Are appraisals that have been conducted just out the window? Any thoughts about acquisition of property?
Well, I think there'll be some opportunity to buy. I mean, that's just my crystal ball and my real estate hat on, but I do think that there'll be some opportunities to buy. I think the bigger question for schools, especially schools directly looking to buy, is when the bond market is going to be actually an active, real market for access to capital. I know that some deals are closing right now. Excuse me. I know that some deals are closing right now, but I think for the most part, the professionals in that long-term financing business are really kind of hesitating on anything right now, just because there's probably some opportunity investors out there and maybe not, sort of real indicators of what the market is or could be after this is all over. So if there's an opportunity, as an example, to buy the piece of ground that you've been wanting to buy, and you've got the cash to do it, that could be a real opportunity on the real estate side to take advantage of market conditions. Especially if there are places where folks were holding on to real estate thinking that they were speculating on an uptick. And I think just in general with talks of recession and depression, hate to use that word, the real estate market tends to follow that.
Thanks. And then for people starting to think about projects down the road that may not be under contract yet, are there recommendations about new contracts that should be structured, clauses that should be inserted this time, construction insurance that should be purchased? Drew, I don't know if you can think, for anybody who doesn't have a contract in place who's going to go through the process, things that they should think about differently now.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. We've been thinking about the properties that we have under contract and the properties that are soon to be going under contract. I think that the important clause to think about, right, is additional time with respect to any type of entitlement process that you need to go through. A time for what we've learned over the last couple of weeks is that some of the appraisals have come back with quotes that take about 3 months. So maybe by adding an appraisal contingency into your purchase contract, thinking about the time it may take and the uncertainty around financing. So ensuring that your financing contingency, and all this is important so that you don't lose your deposits, but you can continue to move forward with respect to getting to where you need to be, because a lot of you really have plans to be open and have made commitments or have grants to open, et cetera, next year.
Is there insurance that helps cover this, or is this still untested?
To be honest, not that I'm aware of. With respect to property purchases, is that what you're referring to, or you mean construction?
And construction, yeah, both.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a, well, let's talk about this. What there is there is builder's risk insurance, and there are payment performance bonds that I know of, right? And what that does is sort of help you make it. I think what's happening is that over this last several years, people have been lax about putting in place payment performance bonds. And one thing that this pandemic is showing is that there may be contractors and subcontractors who become insolvent during a process or as a process is starting, just getting started. And by having those payment and performance bonds in place when you sign your contract will give you an insurance that the project will be built as you put it together. You may have delays along the way, but the financial risk would then be on the contractor, not on the owner.
Okay, thanks.
It's helpful.
David, is this during this process now, is an expediter of help? Are they in the same situation as everybody else? Should everybody have an expediter these days?
It really depends on the area where you're doing business and whether, in a lot of places, or in some places at least, are the architect and your various engineers can kind of play that role in terms of, getting answers and getting things through your approving agency. In other places, typically bigger cities, quite frankly, it's someone you need. Maybe the point of your question is a lot of times their role is actually to go sit in front of people's offices and go to their desk to kind of see where the latest comments are on the latest set of drawings and what it's going to take to move those along. I think it's probably still too early to tell, as a lot of these various approving agencies are moving to virtual offices and online on how that works. At the same time, you still have it can still be someone that is able to follow up, although the mechanism and vehicle has changed. It's no longer obviously face to face, but whether it's through the department's website or phone calls or emails, what have you.
Okay, thanks. There's one question. So there's a school targeted for next year, August 21. They've exhausted the state-approved deferrals. Have you seen any waivers on this where a state can approve an additional deferral due to the pandemic? I'm not sure. My guess is everybody's focused on August 2020 deliveries first.
We haven't run into that situation with Building Hope.
Neither have we.
And I don't think any of the projects that we have for delivery of 2021 at this point, do we see any delays happening? Most of them will probably start construction in the fall.
Okay. The National Alliance is, we'll have another one of these webinars probably later or towards the summer as we start thinking about projects that are targeting 2021 deliveries. So we'll have, just for the audience, we'll have a second conversation about this at some point. Here's one I hadn't thought about. Has anybody seen any schools trying to resize projects with the thought that they may lose enrollment either permanently to distance learning and or may just lose enrollment temporarily? They're not meeting forecasts right now in the spring and have thought about cutting back on a project. Laura, have you seen that?
We've thought about it. Haven't been directly asked by any of our schools to limit the scope or limit the projects, but we certainly, primarily because the student populations that we serve are low-income student populations, and oftentimes the enrollment is a boots on the ground type of effort. You know, less of a Facebook, social media type of enrollment strategy. And so given that the strategy now does not exist, you know, we are concerned about the ability to meet those enrollment targets. I think internally we've been thinking about which projects, as an example, if we're building 12 classrooms, but really the school only needs 6 classrooms to start, do we not finish those remaining the remaining 6 classrooms that won't be utilized to save some cost and maybe some time as well? I think those are things that we're contemplating. I don't think that those are things that in this stage of development and construction will save a ton of money. You know, if the school was going to open with an enrollment of 250 and they only open with 100, those kinds of measures are not going to compensate for the amount of investment and the amount of dollars that are spent. But we certainly are thinking about those types of things. Thinking about things like, you know, maybe not paving the entire parking lot if it's not required by the municipality. Those types of things to just either save some money or defer some cost. I think we're also just anticipating that overall, from all of our portfolio schools, that there'll be an interesting phenomena that happens with enrollment. Possibly some parents will be super excited about teaching their kids at home and continuing in distance learning. There may also be a whole cohort of families that will rally around their existing school or rally around a new school that they believe in after they've experienced teaching their kiddos at home, and may even be bigger advocates.
I think I know one of those. Thanks. There's a question here about this idea of schools being essential construction or not by state. And David, you alluded to New York changing their status for this from time to time. Is anybody else in a state where it's no longer essential service and that they've had to stop because of that? David, I don't know if there's more about New York that you can add, or?
No, just the update I saw yesterday, I believe, was the Empire State Development Corporation, and again, I don't know that it was final, was considering putting public or district and charter schools on the essential list, which they had not been.
Okay.
Of late.
So a lot of the conversation today has really been about the construction and the development of the properties. We will probably do a webinar maybe in 2 to 3 weeks on the capital markets and how that affects this. But we did get a few questions talking about financing. Has anybody seen the capital markets freezing on them and that affecting projects, or has everybody already been fully funded? And then there's another question about, is anybody expecting to see any rent relief for schools that either may have trouble making a payment? I don't think state budgets have really caused that to happen yet, although everybody's certainly watching to see what happens July 1. Laura, have you seen any issues with schools being funded today?
The majority of the schools, we actually sent a little note out to our portfolio schools asking, if there's been an impact. I think for the most part, they felt like the financial impact is a really short-term one. It has to do with, implementing, getting laptops to the kids who didn't have them, implementing, various IT things that maybe they had not planned in their budget. But those are somewhat offset by the fact that, they're not using toilet paper at the school, and they've limited their janitorial contracts and things like that. So I think there's going to be an offset there. I think that most schools felt really comfortable when the majority of the states and the federal government came out and said, as long as you're delivering a distance learning or an online content, we are not going to change our funding model. And then in states like Texas, where it's an ADM state, they basically fixed the ADM to be an average. So those schools that were worried about what that final quarter of ADM would look like, they basically said we would use the balance of the year. We have one school that is that because of their existing and their rent was going from a startup phase to a more permanent phase with us starting this upcoming year. Because of the limitation of being able to physically go and do enrollment, we do anticipate that they're going to request some rent relief from us. That is, that's just something that we will just have to address in supporting them and all getting through this together. We also have received quite a number of our schools asking permission to participate in the CARES Act payroll protection program, and that is technically a borrowing. And so we are encouraged that schools are accessing that program to help not only get them through this period of time, but also ensure that they don't have to lay staff off.
Thanks. Drew, have you seen projects being held up by financing or funding, or is everybody sort of pre-funded before the markets froze up here last month?
Well, the development of charter schools at times is cyclical. We're kind of in the period now where we're entering into deliveries for August, but also beginning to plan and think about the financing that may happen over the summer and in September for the next year's delivery. What we have seen, and Laura mentioned this earlier, is a lot of volatility with the use of tax-exempt bonds. We imagine that will settle down. We have a financial advisory business with that regard, and we're watching that market closely. With respect to bank financing and the projects that we're doing that I can look at, all we're doing right now is really planning with our lenders or potential lenders for projects, trying to understand what their concerns may be. I think we all are thinking there's going to be a liquidity crunch potentially with banks and maybe some backup with banks in terms of efficiency with the SBA, and another round of stimulus might have on that effect to them. And so, yeah, we are seeing some risks out there with financing, although there has not been anybody saying that they're stopping lending. What we are seeing maybe is a miscommunication with respect to where interest rates are with bank rates. I think that there's a impression that they're at an all-time low, which they are low. But I think that banks are sort of bolstering rates and holding their rates to kind of where they were pre the Fed drop in rates to zero. So the effect of that hasn't really changed much of anything from a bank rate perspective for commercial type senior debt construction mini perm loans.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And David, Turner Impact Capital is not immune to all of this, but your funds have been capitalized prior to this. I presume you guys are fine with your projects.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of that, Mark.
So I presume you're fine with your projects, given that you're self-capitalized.
We are, yeah, both with kind of the equity that we've raised, but I think to kind of echo what Drew said in terms of, you know, the banks that, you know, we eventually go to put debt in place on the properties, you know, still doing, I don't know if business as usual is the right term, it probably isn't. And there are kind of, you know, an additional list of questions they're asking now, but, you know, are still very much, you know, looking at our projects and doing work on them.
Thank you. A couple of our audience members have chimed in that Pennsylvania school construction is not essential. And the same with Northern California, it's not automatically seen as essential. So there are some places where charter schools or schools in general are being treated separately or different by state. So keep an eye and see how states are going to change as the summer moves along. So we talked about the facility itself. We talked about the financing just briefly. Again, that'll be a topic for another day. This last question here is, what would you tell schools about purchasing furniture, fixtures, and equipment? We think deliveries are going to take longer. We should get that done ASAP. Or does anybody want to gamble and think that prices might be falling over time? Laura, have you run across this question yet?
There we go. Can you hear me now? Okay. So we have not run into any schools seeing, you know, bargains on furniture. We have been advising our schools that if they're prepared to, whether it's they're using CSP funds or otherwise, if they have to bid that they should get that started, or they should have already gotten that started before. I certainly would be concerned about certain manufacturers if the majority of their materials are coming from overseas, just what that looks like as those plants and stuff have to ramp themselves back up from complete closure. But at the same time, I think that there is a lot of inventory that these manufacturers bring to the U.S. and they've been stored. It may not be the fancy furniture that you had anticipated, but I think there's plenty of just basic desks and chairs that should be able to, you know, at least get you through a couple of operating years until, you know, potentially the next round of furniture can maybe be the more specific stuff that you had wanted.
Great, excellent.
A black hawk just went over my house. Sorry.
Drew, have you any thoughts on schools purchasing FF&E?
I think purchasing FF&E and construction, you know, have very similar risk associated that Laura mentioned, right? I don't see anyone really at this point. I think it's too early to tell whether or not you're going to be able to receive discounts. Certainly, if you're going to open in August, you probably want to get your orders in and figure out a way to ensure that the time frame for delivery is set. But other than that, I have not, you know, really had any experience with a negative experience with FF&E right now.
Okay, thanks. So I'd like to thank all of the audience members who submitted questions. I didn't read a lot of them verbatim, and there's a couple I might have skipped over here. I'll make sure that we forward these questions on to the panelists and see if they have any answers. For those of you who had your name attached to the questions, we'll try and respond back to you as well. As I did mention, this is being recorded. We'll be able to post this. Actually, I'm not sure if we'll get it posted by the end of today or tomorrow. And then we'll also have some people who are trying to summarize some of the highlights from this and put that into either a blog entry or a document or article or some sense for those who are going to find it easier to read this than to watch the entire video all over again. But otherwise, I'd like to thank Laura and Drew and David for their time today. As I mentioned, this is the first. We'll most likely set up a second one on construction, another webinar in a month or two as we see how the conditions change in the marketplace. We'll also be scheduling a webinar on long-term financing, and then we're also talking to some of the short-term lenders to see if they have any news they want to share right now. A lot of it is still new, and as we're all watching what the SBA is doing and these relief packages coming from the feds. So please stay tuned for more webinars. We will be posting them through our email distribution, which is maybe how a lot of you learned about this. We also have there is a LinkedIn group, Public Charter School Facilities, I think is the name of the LinkedIn group. There's probably a couple hundred people signed up for there. So we post to that maybe every other week or so with news. And then you can go to the Facility Center's primary page, facilitycenter.publiccharters.org. Sign up for newsletters there and always find information. A lot of it is reports based on policy, as well as reports that can help schools directly with critical issues. So again, thank you everybody. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you to our attendees for this. And please stay tuned for future webinars during as the pandemic continues and as we just learn more about this, how charter schools can react to this. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks, David. Have a safe day.